Okay, so we'll begin digestive system today. So this is a nice picture up here which kind of shows you some basic functions of each of the parts of the digestive system. And when we look at the organs of the digestive system, we have one part which is known as the alimentary canal, or also called the digestive tract. So this is a tract which has a lumen. So this part is also known as the digestive tract. It has a lumen or cavity. And one part leads to the other. And then associated with this alimentary canal or digestive tract, you have some accessory organs which I'll go over. And in the tract, you will find at different areas you have certain sphincters present, or valves. Very similar to the valves which were present in the heart. Remember, in the heart also they allowed a one-way flow. So similarly here, the function of any sphincter present anywhere is, one, not to allow the contents of one area to get into the other one really fast, and you'll see sometimes it could be a problem. And secondly, to allow again one-way flow. Okay, so let's look at the alimentary canal. So it begins with the oral cavity or the mouth. That leads into the soft palate, and then it comes into the pharynx. And we all did the parts of the pharynx when we did the lymphatic system. So you had the in this case, we are only going to be worried about the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx because food does not go into the nasopharynx. The pharynx then leads into the esophagus. The esophagus leads into the stomach, which leads into the small intestine, and the small intestine is highly coiled and is made up of three parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. So all three parts are called the small intestine. The small intestine then leads into the large intestine, which begins with the appendix. So you can see these are all the parts of the large intestine. So the appendix, then this part which goes up is called the ascending colon. This part which is lying right across the body is called the transverse colon. This part which comes down is called the descending colon because it's coming down. At each end, the colon, you can see here the ascending and the transverse. The ascending is related to the liver. The transverse is related to the spleen. So this part where it kind of turns and makes this bend like this part is often called the hepatic flexure. Flexure means like a bend. And this part here is called the splenic flexure, because it's related to the spleen. Then this descending colon comes into a part which is S-shaped and highly mobile part. This is known as the sigmoid colon, which leads into the rectum and the anal canal. And then that's the outside. So this is all the digestive tract or the alimentary canal. Associated with this are the accessory organs. So here up in the mouth, the salivary glands. So you have three main salivary glands. You have a number of other little salivary glands which are present in the mouth called the buccal glands. If you remove all these salivary glands, the mouth can still, those glands can still kind of lubricate the mouth and produce saliva. But these are the three main glands which you see, and you can see their ducts opening into their mouth. The second accessory organ is a combination of the liver and the gallbladder. We often talk of them together. For the liver, we use the word hepato. Anything to do with the liver, we use the word hepato. This is known as the hepatobiliary apparatus, which includes the liver, the gallbladder, and the ducts associated with them. So they also, as you can see from the liver, you will see later that some ducts come out which join with the gallbladder, then another main duct comes and that opens into the small intestine. And then another organ, the pancreas, you did it in the endocrine system, but now we are going to look at the exocrine part of the pancreas. And again, by means of a duct, it pours its secretions into the small intestine. So these are all of the accessory organs, the salivary glands, the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder, which I've kind of boxed in. Okay. So let's look at, and the sphincters that I mentioned here, the sphincters were 3. So there's one between the esophagus and the stomach. So you can see when the esophagus opens into the stomach. So this sphincter which is present here is called the gastroesophageal sphincter, or also called the esophagogastric sphincter, or also known as the cardiac sphincter, because that's where that is the part of the stomach into which the esophagus opens. And the esophagus has to pass through the diaphragm to open into the stomach, and later we'll see that this sphincter is a little different from the other sphincters. Then where we see the stomach going into the small intestine, so again there's a change of organ. So between the stomach and the small intestine is another sphincter called the pyloric sphincter, because this area of the stomach is known as the pylorus. And then when the small intestine opens into the large intestine, that there is again a little sphincter there which is known as the ileocecal sphincter. It's called ileocecal because ileum is the last part of the small intestine. So ileum is the last part of the small intestine, and it opens into the cecum, which is part of the large intestine. So that's why ileocecal, from ileum to cecum. And then finally, when the feces exit at the anal canal, at the level of the anal canal, again we have sphincters there. One is voluntary and one is involuntary. So those are known as the anal sphincters. So you see the whole bunch of these sphincters all along the way. And you can see that the sphincter will be present wherever one organ opens into another. In the case of the anal sphincter, of course, it's to the outside. Let's look at this video as a quick review on the digestive system organs.
In the digestive system, the mechanical action of teeth grinds food down into smaller particles, and the chemical and wetting action of saliva begins the breakdown of starches into more digestible. The food is processed into the stomach, where the acids and muscular turning can do the mechanical digestion of proteins in the food. In the duodenum, food continues to be digested by the action of other pancreatic and bile secretions. The food passes through the and rectum.
So you can see that was showing you all the organs over there. So now let's look at this question. Which of these is a common feature of the accessory organs of digestion? Yes, very good. They're all connected to the digestive tract, so they have to pour their secretions into the tract by means of ducts, and we'll be doing that. Now, just like when we did the lungs and we did the heart, you remember we had a pleural cavity, and in the case of the heart, we had a pericardial cavity. In the case, and there it was one organ which kind of invaginated into the cavity. In the pleural, it was the lung, in the pericardial, it was the heart. Now here we have peritoneal cavity. So there is the peritoneal cavity, very similar to the pleural and pericardial. But instead of having just one organ pushing into this cavity, you have many organs in the cavity. So obviously the space gets a little tight inside the abdomen in which this peritoneal cavity is lying. So some organs kind of are covered by peritoneum all around, and some organs kind of get pushed to the back, to the posterior abdominal wall, and so they are not covered by peritoneum all along. Okay? So let's look at what happens. So let's see this structure over here. So this is the peritoneal cavity to begin with, and let's say there's one organ, any organ, which has pushed into the peritoneal cavity. Because of its pushing, what happens? The peritoneum, this layer of peritoneum which surrounds the organ would be called the visceral peritoneum. And then this whole layer which is lining the inside of the abdominal cavity would be known as the parietal layer, this part here. Between the two is a peritoneal cavity. And because the organ has kind of pushed into it, what happens is you can see this double fold of membrane, which is kind of allowing the organ to hang in the peritoneal cavity. This is very typical of abdominal organs. So this double fold of peritoneal membrane is known as the mesentery. Okay, here it's called the dorsal mesentery because it's present towards the posterior abdominal wall. So this is just mesentery. And if I was to draw it for you, imagine if you were looking at the peritoneal cavity from the side. If this is anterior and this is posterior, imagine there's an organ here, let's say the stomach, which is trying to push into the peritoneal cavity. So here the next part would be it's gone into the peritoneal cavity. So here, if you look at this, can you see now what has happened to the peritoneal cavities? Can you see? So here is that little sort of double fold of membrane. Imagine another organ pushed in here. So this also, if it pushed in like this, you'll see another organ present here. You get that? So when many organs begin to push inside the peritoneal cavity, as you can see here, so here there was only one organ which pushed from the back. Then now another organ sort of came, the liver, and it started pushing in from the front. So, many such organs begin to push inside. So the whole peritoneal cavity gets very, very crowded. So what happens is some of the organs during development, some of these organs, and let's take this one, because of other organs which are lying in this area, they happen to push on this, and this organ gets pushed on the posterior abdominal wall. So notice from this middle position, it's kind of getting pushed to the posterior abdominal wall. Once it gets pushed to the posterior abdominal wall, the peritoneum between these two areas, that peritoneum dissolves. So here, if I was to kind of draw an in-between figure here, so here is the organ like this, okay, and this organ, draw it here like this. See, it's gone. Can you see how close to the posterior abdominal wall it has gone? So these two layers fuse over here. So they've kind of shown you a later stage. This is an in-between. These two layers fuse and they dissolve and they disappear. So now the peritoneum just covers the sides and the front and then goes to the side and comes off, which is what is shown here. So can you see the back portion or the posterior portion of the organ is not covered by peritoneum? Look here, all around it was covered by peritoneum except for this narrow area where you have that double fold of membrane, okay? So such organs which get pushed to the posterior abdominal wall and lose peritoneum on their posterior aspect, they are lying behind the peritoneum. Can you understand? The peritoneum is like a curtain. So they are lying behind the peritoneum. So these organs are known as retroperitoneal organs. So these organs are called retroperitoneal organ. Retro meaning behind the peritoneum. These organs which are completely surrounded by peritoneum, we usually call them intraperitoneal. By intra, it means they're just surrounded by the peritoneal cavity and they're covered by visceral peritoneum all around. Okay? There's no advantage to being retroperitoneal or intraperitoneal, except in certain situations you will find those organs which need a lot of mobility, like your intestines and your stomach, which need to churn food and mix it up well. They have a mesentery because having a little curtain which allows you to move about is helpful for them. Those organs which don't need to move about too much, you will find they become retroperitoneal. For example, the pancreas. It doesn't need to kind of move, it just needs to secrete. So sitting behind the peritoneum doesn't harm it in any way. Okay, so that's how you'll find that organs which have a lot of movement tend to have this double fold called mesentery, and organs which don't need to move as much tend to kind of remain at the back. Okay, most of the time. Let's look at some functions of peritoneum. Like everywhere else, it is protective. It forms a protective layer. It is lubricant because, it produces peritoneal fluid, so it allows the organs to slide against one another with minimal friction. In areas where there is this fold called mesentery, it might have different names. It allows mobility, so it allows the organs to move. The mesentery is also a passageway for blood vessels and lymphatics and nerves, so blood vessels, nerves and lymphatics. And you will see, imagine there is a blood vessel present here. The aorta is present very close to the vertebra on the posterior abdominal wall. So let's say there's an organ which has become retroperitoneal. So it's very easy for the aorta to send branches to this organ. But imagine this organ which is deep inside here, or even this organ which is present here. So this will send its blood supply through the mesentery. Here it will send its blood supply, and you'll have another blood vessel go like that. So can you see it uses the mesentery to reach the organ? The mesentery also divides the peritoneal compartment cavity into compartments, and here's one example. So because of the presence of this, you can see you have a right side and a left side. This helps in certain situations because, one, it helps to spread the peritoneal fluid. It also helps to localize infection. So imagine there was problem in one area of the peritoneal cavity, it would not spread to the other area because of, having these little compartments. So these are some of the functions of peritoneum. So here is a side view, a sagittal section showing you some peritoneal relationships. So this part is anterior, this is posterior. So here, this green line which you see here is the parietal peritoneum, and then this gets reflected on the organ. So this blue line is the visceral peritoneum, you can see here. So all visceral up here, and here too is visceral. And here you can see the liver almost completely covered by peritoneum. Here's the stomach completely on its anterior and posterior surface by peritoneum. Here are the loops of intestine. This is transverse colon, which is part of the large intestine. So you can see completely covered by peritoneum. Here are the loops of small intestine covered. You can see they are hanging by this mesentery. In some places, this mesentery has different names. For example, when you look at the stomach, the attachment of the mesentery, the name is lesser omentum and greater omentum. So can you see this double fold up here? This is called the greater omentum, and here it's called lesser omentum. This was just one long thing, but it just got folded on itself. So omentum is another name for mesentery. When you look at the small intestine, you just call it mesentery. So this area is just known as mesentery. When you look at the large intestine, based on where it is, we call it mesocolon. For example, if it's in relation to the transverse colon, it's called transverse mesocolon. If it's in relation to the sigmoid, which is not shown here, it will be called sigmoid mesocolon, okay? And here you can see this is the blood vessel aorta on the posterior abdominal wall. Here look at the pancreas, and here look at the duodenum. So can you see these three structures? They have peritoneum just covering their front or anterior aspect. Their posterior aspect is not related to peritoneum. So you can see these three structures are retroperitoneal. Look at everything else. You have this blue line kind of enclosing it all along. So all of these other organs are intraperitoneal. Okay? Okay. Which of these would not be considered retroperitoneal? It's the stomach. If you look at the duodenum and the aorta, and that's why I showed this picture to you. Look at this, the duodenum. This is the duodenum. Can you see this? This is the aorta. This is the pancreas. See this green parietal peritoneum is just covering it on the front and side, and the aorta is lying behind. There is no peritoneum on the posterior aspect. Can you see they are lying in connective tissue? So they are retroperitoneal, okay? Everything else, look at this, stomach on both aspects, transverse colon all around. So with the loops of intestine, so with the liver. In the liver, there's a very, very small area which is bare, but otherwise covered by peritoneum. The importance, why am I mentioning this retroperitoneal structure? The importance of knowing this is that often these organs are present on the posterior abdominal wall. So if you want to approach them and you want to go through the front, you can see you'll have to kind of push all these organs away in order to reach them. So very often retroperitoneal structures may be reached from the back. You might kind of, if you have to do any surgery or anything, you kind of reach it from the back, from the posterior aspect. This also tells you, imagine if there is a carcinoma of the pancreas. You've all heard of that. Pancreatic cancer is kind of one of the worst cancers to have. The prognosis is real difficult. Imagine there's a tumor growing up here in this area. It's lying right at the back. It's kind of covered by all these organs. So you don't get to it doesn't manifest till very late. You don't see a lump or a swelling till very late. And by then it has grown so much that it has involved all of these other organs. And then it's too late, for anything. So that's why pancreatic cancers kind of have a very bad prognosis. Let's look at the blood and nerve supply of the gastrointestinal tract. So there, just in that picture I showed you saw the aorta lying on the posterior abdominal wall. So through branches of the aorta, all parts of the gastrointestinal tract get their nerve supply. The salivary glands, of course, are present in the mouth. So they get branches from the facial and from the branches of the external carotid. But otherwise, below the diaphragm, all of the organs are supplied by branches from the aorta, abdominal aorta. And if you remember, when we were doing circulation, we talked of three main branches of the aorta. They were called the celiac trunk. Then we had the superior mesenteric, which is here. And here, the inferior mesenteric. And, as a rough guide, you can kind of see from this picture. If you look at it from the picture, you can see the celiac trunk is supplying the stomach, the spleen, the liver, and kind of half of the duodenum. The superior mesenteric, you can see the other half of the duodenum, all of the rest of the small intestine, a lot of the colon up to about, 2/3 of the transverse colon. And then the rest of the transverse colon, the descending and the rectum and anal canal are supplied by the inferior mesenteric. You can see that, kind of gives you a very good idea. These arteries are named based on what they will supply. So, if it is going to the stomach, it will be called gastric. If it's going to the spleen, splenic, so it's very easy to name these arteries. The veins are, if you remember when we did the, again, circulatory system, we were talking about a portal venous system where all the veins which follow the arteries, they don't go directly into the inferior vena cava, but they go into the portal vein, and that portal vein takes all the blood. So all of these will go, and they finally join the portal vein, which goes into the liver. And then it breaks up in the liver because the liver processes all the nutrients from the GI tract. And then from the liver, again, branches will begin and they will drain into the hepatic vein, which takes the blood out from the liver. Okay? So the portal vein is the one which takes all the blood from the GI tract and it takes it to the liver. So that's the blood supply. The nerve supply within the gastrointestinal tract, within the walls of the gastrointestinal tract, you actually have a little brain inside there. It's called the gut brain, or it's also known as the enteric nervous system. The word enteric has to do with the intestines. So it's also called the enteric nervous system. This is made up of nerve plexuses. A plexus is just a network of nerves. So you have two plexuses present. One is present, we'll do the layers of the GI tract. One is present in what is called the submucosa. When we did respiratory system, we mentioned submucosa. So one is present in the submucosa, and you either call it the submucosal plexus, or in some areas of the body, this submucosal plexus is also known as the Meissner's plexus. So this is submucosal, and the way you'll remember it is the M submucosal, the two S's here, and submucosal, so that way. And then we have another plexus called the myenteric plexus, which is present between two muscle layers. So this is present in what is called the muscularis externa. So when we do the layers, we'll see it. So this is present in muscularis externa. And these are intrinsic nerve plexuses. They are responsible for causing contraction of the muscle. So they cause contraction of smooth muscle and they cause secretion from the glands. So this is digestive activity, secretion from glands and contraction of smooth muscle. So these two plexuses are responsible for doing that. And you can see they interconnect with one another. They send their branches to the glands in the submucosa and to the epithelium, so they'll cause secretion from there. And they are influenced by the sympathetic and the parasympathetic parts of the autonomic nervous system. The parasympathetic stimulates these plexuses, so it has a stimulatory effect. That means it causes increase in secretion, increase in contraction of the smooth muscle. The sympathetic tends to depress it, and the main action of the sympathetic is on the sphincters. It tends to keep the sphincters closed. So it causes contraction of the sphincters, keeps them closed, and when they need to open, then the parasympathetic system will kind of relax them, and that's how they will open up. And here what I also want you to see, look at the mesentery up here. So you can see this double kind of this, the way it's hanging, and you can see nerves and blood vessels and lymphatics all passing in the mesentery, and that's how, blood and nerve supply goes to the digestive tract. So let's look at this. Which of the following organ-artery pairs don't match? Just by general knowledge or, just by common sense, which do you think doesn't kind of make sense? Yes, very good. Pancreas and accessory. You would call it pancreatic. An artery going to the pancreas would be pancreatic. If it goes to the spleen and is called splenic, going to the pancreas is pancreatic. Colon is colic. Yes, because you have colic branches. Colon, the adjective for colon is colic. Okay, so pancreas, you call it pancreatic branches. So that's the. So let's stop here.